Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2024 week 7, February 12th to February 18th, and we are starting in the engine bay, and we need to put a thermostat in this car. So what the thermostat does is it opens and closes, and when the thermostat is closed, no coolant flows out of the engine. Well, I should say a little tiny bit flows out, but the majority of the water and the coolant stays in the engine. So the thermostat that I bought, I want to say I bought a 190 degree Fahrenheit thermostat. So what's going to happen is at 190 degrees, once the engine is up to temperature, that thermostat is going to open up, and then the coolant is going to start flowing through the radiator into the top of the radiator. It's going to go down to the bottom. The fans that I have installed are going to blow air across the radiator, or if you're driving, down the highway going at highway speeds, air will flow naturally through the radiator. And then the water gets picked up from the bottom of the water pump and flowed through the system. So the reason why you have the thermostat is if you didn't have one, coolant would just always be flowing through the system, and it'd be very difficult to build up heat inside the engine. And when the engine gets hotter, it gets more efficient, and also that's how you build heat for things like your heater. So that's what the thermostat is. So now that the thermostat is installed, I'm going to undo some of the bolts on these engine plates so that I can take the hoist chain off. I don't need that anymore. And on the passenger side bolt, after I take the chain off, we kind of struggle putting the bolt back in, kind of play with it a little bit, have to lift the engine up a little bit and get it into place. So that definitely took a little bit longer than I would have liked it to have, but whatever. We got the bolts through the engine plate into the head all done, and I'm just tightening up the bolts that connect the engine plates to the chassis right now, and just kind of making sure all the bolts are a little tighter. And I know this is a terrible angle, but I'm just loosely getting the alternator tensioner back in place. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build a bypass hose. So what the bypass hose is, in the thermostat, I don't know if you noticed it when I had it off, but there's a tiny little hole on the one side. So that's so that there's always some coolant leaving the engine, because if you were pumping coolant in and it had nowhere to go, it would kind of cause a like the water would just lock and wouldn't have anywhere to go. So with this bypass, there's at least going to be a dribble of coolant leaving the engine and going into the radiator. Also, that means that the radiator will have a little bit of temperature in it, just so it doesn't get all that hot fluid all at once and, you know, have a huge temperature change. So what I'm doing is I'm swapping out the fittings on both the thermostat housing and the water pump over to AN fittings. Originally, I wasn't going to build an AN hose, but I kind of thought about it and I figured it out, and I can make it work with AN, so that's what I'm going to do. I mean, you've seen me build AN hoses a ton of times. Put the fittings on, put the first fitting together, put it back on the car, measure out the length, cut the length, build the hose. Bingo bango, you got your AN fitting or AN line. And just like that, our bypass hose is built, installed, and tightened down, and that should be just fine. Now that's installed, I can kind of get the alternator tightened back up and more or less into place. The next thing that I'm doing here is I'm just rerouting some of the lines and stuff. So that's an air line that goes to the surge valve for the procharger. But I've also got that gray wire that is the wire that goes to the driver's side head and to the driver's side coils. So it's kind of in a terrible spot. So as I was going through some of this, I noticed there was a little bit of oil and dirt on the top of the timing cover. So I figured it'd take a few seconds to clean it up. But now I'm just going to reroute that wire so that's a little bit nicer. Now that the wire's kind of been routed, can tape it up a little bit with the rest of the wires, make it clean. And it's at this point that I spend a bunch of time looking for the tape that I just had in my hand. I have no idea where it went. You can see I'm searching kind of all over the engine bay for it, and it's just kind of gone at this point in time. I end up going and grabbing a new roll or a different roll because I just cannot find it. I later found it. I think it was on the driver's side header, like it had fallen off and then hit on the header. But yeah, like I spent a bunch of time looking for it. Alright, well, now that we've got that rerouted, we can start reinstalling the procharger. I mean, you've seen me do this a whole ton, so I'm not going to talk too much. But I do need to reinstall the air conditioning compressor, get all that stuff bolted up, and then I can get the procharger reinstalled. So one thing I'm doing here is these are stainless steel bolts with stainless steel lock nuts. I'm putting a little bit of anti-seize on the bolts, just that way there's a little bit of a layer between the two pieces of stainless steel. That way when I tighten them down, they don't gall and fuse themselves together, never to be removed again. since I'm kind of putting this back together to get the car on the road, I'm finally going to tighten down these bolts that hold the procharger from clocking. So you can adjust the outlet position, just loosen up those bolts and then adjust it. So I got it where I need, so I can tighten all the 6 bolts down now. Alright, with the procharger back on, it is time to fix my fuck up from the last video. So when I was pulling the belt off, I destroyed the threads. Well, I didn't destroy them, but I messed up a bunch of the threads. So I'm just taking a file now and cleaning them all up. I'm going to use a couple of different files and clean the threads up best I can so there's no sharp bits to tear up the belts. At the end, I think it comes out pretty nice. I'm really happy with how it came out. And now it's time to put this belt back on. So I end up fighting with this for a while, you know, with the tensioner and everything else. At the end of the day, what it came down to was I just need to turn the motor over while I'm putting the belt on. There's just no other way to get it on. And another thing that I'm doing here is I'm checking how parallel the procharger and the crank pulley are, because before the procharger was kind of pulled forward, and this time I made sure that everything was tightened and back. And so yeah, like both the procharger and the crank pulley are perfectly straight with each other now, so that's perfect. And what I'm doing here is loosening off all the bolts so I can try and get a little bit of movement in the procharger to get the belt on, but this does not work again. I just need to crank over or spin the engine while I'm putting it on. But before I get to that, I realized I don't have the actual engine belt on, and that has to go on behind the procharger belt. So good thing I didn't get the procharger belt on, otherwise I would have had to have taken it back off in order to get this on. At least I think I would have had to. Yeah, because how would I get that over there? And yeah, I would have had to have. So now that I got that on, I can continue getting the procharger belt back on. Yeah, just, you know, spin the engine by hand and the belt goes on pretty easily. Got to tighten up all the bolts. so I'm pulling the tensioner back off, and I'm just checking to make sure that I can replace that brass bushing in the back with all of this stuff on still. So I'm just, you know, going through the motions of replacing it just to make sure that I can. It's not going to be that difficult. Yeah, I can replace it easily, so I'm okay leaving it until I get it in. Alright, with the procharger back installed, that is all the time we have for this video. So as always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.